Thank you very much. I wish you all a nice day. And let me start today's press conference with a congratulatory message because it's Matik's Day. It's appropriate to take this opportunity to say that this is a day when no one should hesitate and should turn to their mother and thank her for everything she has done for them. I am a supporter of the fact that we don't need holidays to bring flowers to mothers and visit them, but if we do it today, it will be even nicer. So I greet my mother from Bratislava to the Great Courts. I also take this opportunity to congratulate my good colleague and friend because today is Robert Kaliňák's birthday, so somehow it all came together. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to make a few brief remarks, information, and assessments. As you know, about 2 weeks ago, I made a public statement that, if an agreement is reached, the representatives and the party Smer Slovak Social Democracy are ready to change the long-standing tradition and not participate in political discussions on Sunday in the 4 television shows that are offered to the citizens of the Slovak Republic. I argued that these shows only increase the tension and aggressiveness of society, and it is inappropriate for such types of shows to be made on Sunday. So I am ready to join an agreement on the basis of which these non-Sunday shows would be moved to weekdays from Monday, perhaps including Saturday. To formalize it, because we have such and such answers, there are political parties that agree with it. There are political parties that are restrained. There are those who are against it. Tomorrow I will officially send a letter to all the chairmen of political parties to give a definitive statement on this topic, because again, we cannot suddenly decline. If anyone thinks that we will stop going to the shows and they will all go and curse at us, then they are very mistaken. Either it will not happen and we will not go there, or it will continue, and this tradition, which has been here for many years, will be maintained. But then at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, I decided to continue these press conferences, which are still happening today. What awaits us next week? Let me inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that I will start organizing meetings by individual ministries, because it is time again to look at the implementation of the government's program statement. There is a certain atmosphere here, perhaps that basically nothing is happening in this state, but there is a lot happening in this state. The government is making a huge number of decisions. The ministries are working, fulfilling the government's program, and therefore step by step, I was doing it before May 2024. But then the event in Handlova prevented me from doing so. I'm going back to that. I'll visit each ministry. We'll take stock of the implementation of the government's program statement as of May 2025, and we'll talk about what's most relevant for 2025 in each ministry. It will be visual. We'll make boards showing what has been accomplished, what has not been accomplished, and what is a priority for the given department in 2025. I assume that the first such meetings will take place this week. Furthermore, allow me to inform you that on May 15th, exactly 1 year after the assassination attempt, activities will be organized practically all day long. I can inform you that in addition to the usual sub-rolling copier conferences, we are planning a big meeting at Handlova 15 May, to which you will of course be invited, because we refuse to allow Slovak politics when it comes to the work of the opposition to be built on hatred. Because what they are demonstrating is pure hatred. And the result of this hatred, as they have presented it for a long, long time, and especially after the parliamentary elections in 2023, was also the assassination attempt on my person. We cannot ignore this date. Therefore, on May 15th, a decision has already been made, and there will be various subplots that will concern the events of a year ago, and above all, what lessons can be learned from what happened, and whether or not anything has changed in the behavior of the opposition. Already at this moment, I must state that their aggressiveness is even greater than it was before the 15th. May. The 2 biggest challenges facing the Slovak government if I go back to the implementation of the government's program statement. It is the problem of sanctions and the problem of the goal of the trade war. On the one hand, we know that sanctions imposed against the Russian Federation do not always serve their purpose, and sometimes even have the effect of harming the interests of the EU. But now the issue of the trade war that is taking place between the EU and the SP and China is in the first place. If we talk about the trade war, the Slovak Republic is very sensitive because we have a huge concentration of car production. You know that a target of 25% was imposed on car production, and that Slovakia has a huge concentration of car production is the first in terms of the consequences that may come in a short time. We have had a very important meeting with representatives of the automotive industry, and I can repeat and confirm, ladies and gentlemen, that the Slovak government is ready to make the necessary changes to the law, which we call the Short-Time Work Act. This law was adopted in connection with COVID, but we are missing a title in this law because no one assumed that production could be limited due to tariffs. We therefore need to make a minor change to this law so that we can draw resources for short-time work in this case as well. We talked about this at the last meeting of the Slovak government. Ladies and gentlemen, and the Minister of Labor, Family and Social Affairs confirmed that in the abbreviated procedure for the upcoming session, which begins on May 27th, we are submitting an amendment to the Act on Short-Time Work on behalf of the Slovak government. This amendment will consist of a new title when we will be able to access this mechanism. I will repeat to the Slovak public that if production orders are falling, companies should normally react by laying off people. But laying off a person today is firstly unsocial. Secondly, it is very difficult for the employer because he has to pay him various benefits, and then when he takes this person back, he suddenly cannot find the same one. He has to retrain people. It is a very difficult process. That's why there is an institute called short-time work, where if there are not enough orders, people do not work at full capacity. They stay at home, but they remain in employment and receive a significant part of their salary. In this case, it is 80% of the wage, with 60% of this amount being reimbursed to the employer by the state. 20% is reimbursed by the employer. This will allow employers, in this case car manufacturers, not to lay off people, to have people work shorter hours, to be able to stay at home, but they will still remain employees and will receive a significant part of their salary. As for financing, we have a special fund for this purpose, which is under the management of the Ministry of Labor, Family and Social Affairs. If I remember the number, the Minister of Labor, Family and Social Affairs said that there is currently up to 200 million euros in this fund, which could be sufficient in the initial stage. In addition, we are counting on intensive negotiations with the European Union and the United States. I am somewhat convinced that at some point there could be an agreement that there would be no hole, neither from the European side nor from the United States, and we would end up somewhere at zero. We are offering for this because it is a vital thing for us. This is the biggest challenge. This is the biggest challenge facing the Slovak Republic. And if I asked the opposition today what solutions they had, they would come up with absolutely nothing. The second huge topic, ladies and gentlemen, is the issue of stopping the flow of gas, oil, and nuclear materials from the Russian Federation, as the European Commission is pushing for. We had a separate press conference on this topic with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Economy. I will repeat it because it is very important to me to be consistent. I will repeat it. We are currently waiting for draft legislative acts that must be adopted at the European Union level, which will ban the import of oil, gas, and nuclear materials from the Russian Federation. I am announcing very clearly that if these legislative acts correspond to the strategy of the roadmap, as presented by the European Commission, the Slovak Republic will vote against such legislative acts. And if it were a unanimous vote, or if a unanimous vote was needed, we are ready to veto such decisions. However, I think that the big countries, the big boys, will assert a qualified majority in the European Union. So the big countries will also decide for the small countries, in which case we will only be able to vote against these senseless embankments. We and the gentlemen took advantage of the Security Council meeting. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense were also present, and the President of the Nuclear Regulatory Authority was present at the Security Council meeting. And we also talked about the topic of nuclear fuel. Maybe I'm making it a little easier when I say that if someone thinks that in a Russian reactor, because we only have Russian reactors in Slovakia, we are now completing its 5th and 6th in Makovce. we will just take fuel from Westinghouse, from the United States, and that it will work, then they are very happy. First of all, we have experience here from other countries, where this caused huge technological and safety problems. Secondly, Madam President clearly said that if new fuel is put into nuclear power plants, there must be a testing process that takes several years, and only after those several years, when it is shown that it is safe, can some other fuel be used. Therefore, the idea of the European Commission that we will prohibit the member states of the European Union, because there are more of them, I think there are 5 or 6 of us, we will prohibit the member states from taking nuclear fuel or enriched uranium, and that we will just replace it, is naive. I don't know who came up with such a proposal to the European Commission, but he obviously didn't know much about it when he made such proposals. Slovenské elektrárne and others who are in contact with nuclear power plants in the Slovak Republic are saying very clearly. So either we build new capacities, it will cost 20 billion euros and it will take 8 years for enrichment, or we stop the operation of nuclear power plants. But we, the only ones in Slovakia, produce a significant part of our electricity from nuclear power. And here we have to pay for an ideological decision again. And sorry, but I have to be open here. We should put that in the threat of a nuclear power plant in Slovakia and stop them. Although we produce almost 70% of our electricity from them, it's just because there is a Russophobic policy in the European Union. There is some kind of obsession with Russia. Let's not be crazy. Hopefully, we will not harm Slovakia and our economic interests just because an ideological war is being waged between some large states of the European Union and the Russian Federation. Therefore, this is a topic that is extremely important for us. We will monitor the development of the legislative process and will participate in it to the fullest extent possible. We are in favor of diversification. Of course we are. But diversification cannot mean endangering the national economic interests of the Slovak Republic. And I repeat, the plan presented by the European Commission contradicts the Versailles Declaration, which was signed, I suspect, in 2022 or 2023, where there was talk only of a gradual shutdown, but not of a complete halt to the supply of these strategic raw materials to Slovakia. I do not want to talk about the Krakow gas, but I believe that there will be enough opportunities for us to communicate about it when the legislative initiatives are on the table. So once again, if a qualified majority votes against, if unanimity is inevitable in adopting these acts, then we will definitely go to law and science. The last thing I will say to the Deputy Prime Minister is a brief summary of my criticism of the Russian Federation. Look, you can think about it whatever you want, or look at it however you want. I declare very clearly that my goal is to show respect to the descendants of those who died in Slovakia during the liberation of Slovakia. I also said that I reject the policy of the Iron Curtain, which is evident that Iron Curtain already exists between the European Union and the Russian Federation, and that as Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, I want to extend a hand over this curtain for economic cooperation, for normal standard cooperation, and therefore, with full respect for everyone, that we have some history of our own. And that history is connected with liberation and with assistance to the Slovak national uprising. So I stand by the fact that this journey had its moral basis. It had its very serious moral basis. And besides, I see this journey as a significant diplomatic success. If you can find a Slovak opposition politician who managed to have not 4 meetings in one afternoon, those were not meetings. Those were working negotiations with the Vietnamese Secretary General, with the Chinese President, with the Brazilian President, and with the Russian President. Then I congratulate him. I have summarized all these meetings, if possible, in the outputs that I made directly in Moscow. We only published them yesterday morning, because we finished the last meeting with the Russian President before midnight, and there was no point in annoying the public at night. And these statements clearly confirm what was the subject of the negotiations. Those were specific things. Those were visas. Those were cooperation in the defense sector. Those were cooperation. Now I'm talking about all 4 with whom I negotiated. Those were cooperation in the field of nuclear power plants. where Vietnam and Brazil in particular have a huge interest. Brazil generates almost all its electricity from water and is considering going to the nuclear power plant exhibition. We have something to encourage. We have great experts. The same applies to Vietnam, where a political decision was made to build a new nuclear power plant. I think we can make a significant contribution here. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to make one point, and I'll end with that. I don't know how the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy wants to do foreign policy when we're not supposed to meet. Moreover, the European Union does not have a foreign policy yet. We still do not have one. But if we think that we will not meet, and we will not communicate, and we will not get information, then it is not about diplomacy. This has nothing to do with foreign policy. I will give one example, if you will allow me. In the negotiations with the Chinese president, we received crucial information about the further development of the trade war between China and the United States. Crucial information. If our diplomacy within the European Union, I'm talking about ours, the European Union, because I belong to the European Union, if our European Union were active enough, it could have the same information. It could know exactly what we were told at the working meeting, what China's next steps will be in terms of increasing the target between the United States. They are currently at 145%, I think. This is how the cards come in. But more importantly, in the negotiations with the Russian president, I raised a question. Mr. President, can you inform us about what is happening on the front? What about the ceasefire? Why not a ceasefire? I was surprised that in this part of the meeting, President Putin did not respond to these questions, but then he asked me to meet privately. And in the private meeting, he said exactly what happened. He said very clearly, Mr. Prime Minister, I know that you're still pushing for a ceasefire, that it's an important priority for you, whether it's a 3-day or a 30-day one. But I want to tell you here, just this, please keep this to yourself at this moment, that everyone, if you leave here from my reception, I will make a public statement and say that I want to negotiate with Ukraine without any conditions, as quickly as possible, and we will go and look for some solutions. And it happened. Simply, I had that information in advance. Again, if there were negotiations with the Russian side, how to negotiate, because that's what diplomacy and foreign policy are about. Diplomacy could have already had this information, and they wouldn't have been surprised. I'm shocked that there's a proposal here that the 15th. On May 11th, Russians and Ukrainians can meet in Istanbul for direct negotiations, where concrete results can be achieved, and I'm already hearing German and French statements that they don't agree. What do they have to do with that? Isn't it a matter for Ukraine? How come Ukraine has some spokespeople? So it will be, is Ukraine interested or not interested? If it continues like this, I think the war will last for several more years. If elementary things are not respected, it will take several more years. And then let them not blame me when I publicly refer and say that many Western countries are extremely interested in this war continuing. Why on earth do they not agree to the proposal for direct negotiations on the 15th? May in Istanbul. I am losing my understanding of this. I believe that this opinion will be changed, and I reiterate that this is a matter for Ukraine and Russia. First of all, if they are interested in negotiating, let them negotiate, because this is how Russia and Ukraine have already negotiated, and that was in April 2022, after the start of the conflict. When everything was ready, Ukraine was ready to sign the final agreements. The big boys from the West came and said no. We must use this war to be Russian and to harm them. That is why I remind you that I consider these meetings and this trip to be extremely important. Not because I said what I said, that I would go there if something happened. This was not a frivolous undertaking on my part, but it was an opportunity to use the space for extremely serious bilateral meetings and negotiations, which are extremely important for the Slovak Republic, reflecting our worldview. Nothing will change. Robert Fico will conduct a sovereign Slovak foreign policy oriented towards all four world powers, while respecting the fact that we are members of the European Union and NATO, and that we want to be solid and reliable partners in these two important international institutions. Thank you very much.
Hello, Shimona Tomkova. Denigan. Question for the Prime Minister. Were you at the military parade on Sherbeny Square?
Madam Editor, we have published the program. We published the official program, where it was clearly stated that I would begin my work program in Moscow by laying flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Then there was a joint lunch of the heads of delegations. Then I had several meetings, not at the level of the chairman or presidents. And then there were bilateral negotiations, which you were informed about. I didn't even have it on the program. So if I didn't have it on the program, I wasn't there. Did you miss it there? Huh? Editor, you know, that's your cunning. But it's stupid. Now you're unhappy that I wasn't at the military review. Because if I was at the military review, nothing else is written about except the military review. I don't know how to explain it. You are young and you probably see things differently than I do. I see Slovakia dotted with cemeteries and memorials where Red Army soldiers are buried during the liberation, and my journey was clearly connected to the past. It was a show of respect and honor. And while I was there, I took the opportunity to have bilateral talks where I behaved consistently. I had the opportunity to speak with the president of the Human Federation in the presence of the media. I spoke to the media. It's as if I were standing here before you now, and I was talking to the human president in the essential part. You had the opportunity to see what I was saying, and that's exactly what it was. So now you're all crying again that I wasn't on a military review. Because if I was on a military review, it's just a military review. I'm not 3 years old, Mr. Reactor, so no, I wasn't on the military review. I wasn't. I was busy with other things. I thank the people of the Russian Federation. I also met with ordinary people. For example, I visited an extremely interesting interactive museum of World War II. We could perhaps do something similar in Slovakia, in connection with the Slovak national uprising. It's unique. I think people should see it. The people there were normal because many of them recognized me. I talked to some of them. Those people are extremely appreciative that other countries can also show respect and honor to what the Red Army did in 1941 and 1945. So I'll answer your question technically. No, I wasn't at the Boyenka review. But if you allow me, perhaps we won't have a discussion about why now. Now you will ask me what was for lunch at Mr. Putin's. And then the question will be why you ate it. And then you will ask me that when you met Mr. Putin, there were a lot of people there. And why were there so many people there? Have a little fun, you old man. You can't even make up your mind about it. You are so confused about my journey that you don't know how to take it. You are completely confused. You are confused. You would like to beat me on the head from morning till night for that journey. And then suddenly you see bilateral meetings, recognition of the Slovak Republic. These are global powers, so I don't know if I'm negotiating with the Chinese president, the Brazilian president, the highest representative of Vietnam, the Russian president. These are the two most consistent people in the world. The third is, or I don't want to say it like that, the order. It's Mr. Trump, Putin, and Mr. Sitipin. So I negotiated with two of them. And you asked me why I wasn't at the military review. That you're not that interested in what we talked about with Mr. President Sitipin. With Mr. President Putin, what I talked about, for example, in connection with our efforts to supply certain military products to Brazil, then the Minister of Defense will provide the exact information, of course. Because our company came in second in a competition there. We discussed it a lot with the Brazilian president. What's going on there? Would it be possible to deliver our military products there? So it only shows your baseness, your baseness. Your question is why I wasn't at the military review. Because, well, that's the kind of answer I can give at this moment. Another question, please.